My son drained the family accounts and ran away with my gold digger DIL. I was devastated. That's when my 8-year-old grandson said, "Grandma, I had hidden cameras in the house." 2 days later, they came back in handcuffs. I'm glad to have you here. Follow my story until the end and comment the city you're watching from so I can see how far my story has reached. The first thing I noticed that Tuesday morning wasn't the silence in the house, though it should have been. It was the smell of coffee that wasn't there. Clark always made coffee when he stayed over, and yesterday he'd promised Levi pancakes for breakfast. But when I shuffled to the kitchen in my slippers, rubbing sleep from my eyes, the coffee maker sat cold and untouched. "Clark?" I called out, my voice echoing through the empty hallway. "Ophelia?" Nothing. I climbed the stairs slowly, my arthritic knees protesting with each step. Their bedroom door stood wide open, revealing an unmade bed and clothes scattered across the floor. Not unusual for Ophelia, who treated my house like a hotel. But Clark had always been neat. Too neat, his father used to say. That's when I saw it. A white envelope propped against the lamp on my nightstand. My name written in Clark's careful handwriting across the front. My hands trembled as I tore it open. The letter was short, clinical almost, like he was firing an employee rather than abandoning his mother. "Mom, Ophelia and I have decided to start fresh somewhere new. We've taken what we need to build a life for our family. You'll understand someday that this is better for everyone. Don't try to find us. Clark." The words swam before my eyes. Taken what we need? What did that mean? I stumbled downstairs to my desk, fumbling for the phone to call my bank. The automated voice recited numbers that made no sense at first. Checking account, $0. Savings, 0. The CD I'd been saving for Levi's college fund, emptied yesterday. There must be some mistake, I whispered to the customer service representative, though deep down I knew there wasn't. "I'm sorry, Mrs. Patterson, but the accounts were closed by Clark Patterson yesterday afternoon. He had power of attorney authorization from 6 months ago. 6 months ago, when I'd signed those papers Clark brought over, telling me it was just for emergency purposes. In case something happens to you, Mom. Just to make things easier. I'd trusted him completely. Why wouldn't I? He was my son." I hung up and walked to the garage, my legs moving on autopilot. Clark's vintage Mustang was gone, of course. The one I'd helped him restore when he was 16, spending weekends in that garage teaching him the difference between a Phillips head and a flathead screwdriver. The car I'd signed over to him last Christmas, because Ophelia said it would mean so much to have it officially in his name, but it was the empty space where my own car should have been that made me sink onto the concrete step. My sensible Honda, paid off and reliable, was gone too, stolen by my own son. The medication cabinet in the bathroom told the same story. My heart pills, blood pressure medication, the insulin I needed twice daily, all gone. Even the prescription bottles, as if he wanted to erase any evidence I needed them. I sat on my bed, staring at the empty hangers in the closet where Ophelia's designer clothes had hung. She'd always been particular about her things, insisting on the master bedroom when they moved in temporarily 18 months ago. The temporary stay that became permanent when Clark lost his job and couldn't make rent on their apartment. "It's just until I get back on my feet, Mom," he'd said, hugging me tight. "You're saving our lives." Now I understood. I hadn't been saving their lives. I'd been funding their escape. My phone rang, startling me from my thoughts. Levi's school. "Mrs. Patterson, this is Jennifer from Ridgemont Elementary. Levi hasn't been picked up yet, and we couldn't reach his parents." I glanced at the clock. 3:30. Of course they'd forgotten him too. "I'll be right there," I said, then remembered I had no car. "Actually, could someone possibly drive him home? I'm having car trouble." The 20 minutes it took for the school counselor to arrive with Levi felt like hours. I used the time to check every drawer, every hiding place where I might have stashed emergency money. Nothing. They'd been thorough. When Levi walked through the front door, his Star Wars backpack dragging behind him, I forced myself to smile. He was only 8 years old. Whatever was happening between the adults, he didn't deserve to carry that weight. "Where's Mom and Dad?" he asked, dropping his backpack by the door exactly like I'd taught him. They had to. "Go away for a little while," I said carefully. "But you're staying with Grandma. We'll have fun, just the two of us." Levi nodded, seemingly unbothered. "Can we watch cartoons?" "Of course, sweetheart." As he settled onto the couch with the remote, I retreated to the kitchen to figure out how to explain to an 8-year-old that his parents had abandoned us both. The refrigerator was nearly empty. Another thing I hadn't noticed this morning. They'd even taken most of the groceries. I opened the last can of soup in the pantry and put it on to heat, calculating in my head. Without my medications, I had maybe a week before serious problems started. Without money, I couldn't buy groceries. Without a car, I couldn't even get to the store if I had money. But it was the silence that hurt most. Clark hadn't just stolen my money and disappeared. He'd stolen my son, the boy I'd raised alone after his father walked out when Clark was 12, the child I'd worked double shifts to support, missing Christmas parties and school plays so he could have everything he needed. The boy who used to call me every Sunday without fail, who brought me flowers on Mother's Day, who told me I was the strongest person he knew. That night, after Levi had fallen asleep on the couch watching cartoons, I sat in my rocking chair and cried, deep, silent sobs that shook my whole body. I cried for the money, yes, but mostly I cried for the betrayal, the devastating realization that somewhere along the way, I'd lost my son to a woman who saw our family as nothing more than a bank account to be drained. Outside, rain began pattering against the windows, and I wondered if Clark and Ophelia were somewhere warm and dry, spending my life savings on a future that had no room for the woman who'd made it all possible. The worst part was the letter, not what it said, but what it didn't say. No explanation, no apology, no acknowledgement of what he was taking from me. Just cold, calculated theft, dressed up as a family decision. As I finally drifted off in that chair, one thought kept circling in my mind. How do you mourn someone who's still alive but no longer exists to you? The next morning, I woke up with a crick in my neck and Levi standing beside my chair, fully dressed for school. His clothes were wrinkled, he'd slept in them, but he'd brushed his teeth and combed his hair as best an 8-year-old could manage. "Grandma, are you okay?" His small hand touched my shoulder, and the concern in his voice broke my heart all over again. "I'm fine, honey. Just tired." I struggled to stand, my body protesting after a night in the rocking chair. "Are you hungry?" He nodded, and I realized I had no idea how to get him to school without a car, let alone feed him properly with the single can of soup and half a loaf of bread left in the kitchen. "Grandma," Levi said quietly as I heated the last of the oatmeal, "I know Mom and Dad aren't coming back." I turned from the stove, studying his face. Sometimes I forgot how perceptive children could be. "What makes you say that?" "Because they took all their clothes, and Mom said bad things about you when she thought I wasn't listening." My heart clenched. "What kind of bad things?" Levi looked down at his hands. "She said you were old and useless and that Dad needed to grow up and stop taking care of you." He paused, then looked up at me with those serious brown eyes. "But that's not true, Grandma. You take care of us." I had to turn back to the stove to hide my tears, out of the mouths of babes. "There's something else," Levi said hesitantly. "Something important." I set his bowl of oatmeal in front of him and sat down. "What is it, sweetheart?" "I have cameras." "Cameras?" He nodded, suddenly animated. "Hidden ones. Dad gave me a spy kit for Christmas, remember? With the tiny cameras you can hide anywhere?" I did remember. Clark had been so proud of that gift, telling Levi he could be a real detective. It had seemed like such innocent fun at the time. "I put them all over the house," Levi continued, eating his oatmeal between words. "In the living room, in their bedroom, even in your study." I wanted to catch the tooth fairy, but then I started hearing Mom and Dad say mean things when they thought no one was around. My pulse quickened. "What kind of things?" "Mom called you names, really bad names," and Dad laughed. Levi's face scrunched up with the effort of remembering. "She said you were too stupid to know what they were doing to your money." I felt sick. "Levi, do you still have these recordings?" "Uh-huh. They're all saved on my tablet. Dad showed me how to download them so I could watch them later." He jumped up from the table. "Want to see?" Minutes later, we sat on the couch with Levi's tablet between us. He navigated to a folder labeled Spy Videos, with the confidence of a child who'd grown up with technology. The first video was dated 3 weeks ago. "This one's really bad," Levi warned me before pressing play. The video was grainy but clear enough. Clark and Ophelia in their bedroom, voices low but audible. Ophelia was pacing, her blonde hair perfectly styled even in her pajamas. "I'm tired of pretending to like her, Clark. The old bat follows me around like a lost puppy, trying to be helpful. It's pathetic." Clark was sitting on the bed, and I could see his face clearly. My son, the boy I'd raised, laughed at his wife's cruel words. "Just a little longer, babe. Once we get everything transferred, we're out of here. It's taking too long. She's starting to ask questions about the bank stuff. She trusts me completely. Always has. Mom's biggest weakness is that she loves me too much to see what's really happening." The words hit me like physical blows. I paused the video, my hands shaking. "There's more," Levi said quietly. "Lots more." The next video showed them in my study, going through my filing cabinet. Ophelia was photographing documents with her phone while Clark kept watch. "Perfect. This power of attorney thing was genius, baby. She signed it without even reading it properly. I told you she would. She thinks I'm still her little boy who needs help." Clark's voice was full of contempt. She'd sign her own death certificate if I asked nicely enough. Another video. This one from just days ago. They were in the kitchen, and I could hear myself in the background calling that dinner was ready. "God, I hate her voice," Ophelia said, not bothering to lower hers. "That fake sweet tone like she's talking to a child. No wonder your dad left her." "Don't," Clark said, but he was smiling. "That's my mom you're talking about. Your mom who's too dumb to realize we've been bleeding her dry for months. Your mom who actually believes we're going to take care of her when she gets old and sick." Ophelia laughed, a cold sound that made my blood freeze. "The nursing home is going to love her, especially the cheap ones." I had to stop the video. The betrayal was suffocating, but it was Clark's face that destroyed me. He wasn't being manipulated or pressured. He was an active, willing participant in this cruelty. "Grandma, are you crying?" Levi's small voice brought me back to the present. "A little," I admitted, wiping my eyes. "These recordings, they're very important, Levi. They prove that Mom and Dad did something very wrong. I know. That's why I saved them all." He scrolled through the folder, showing me dozens of videos. I was going to show Dad, but then I heard him being mean too. Smart boy. Smarter than his grandmother, apparently. "Levi, we need to call the police. What your parents did, taking all that money without permission, that's stealing, even from family." He nodded solemnly. "Will they go to jail?" The question hung in the air between us. Would I really send my own son to prison? 24 hours ago, the answer would have been an immediate no, but that was before I knew the truth, before I heard him laugh at my pain and plan my future abandonment. "Maybe?" I said finally. "Is that okay with you?" Levi considered this with the seriousness only children can bring to adult problems. "They left me too," he said finally. "They didn't even say goodbye." And there it was, the final piece that hardened my resolve. They hadn't just betrayed me. They'd abandoned their own child without a second thought. So focused on their escape plan that they'd forgotten the 8-year-old boy who would be left behind to pick up the pieces. "Then we're going to fight back," I told him, pulling him close. "You and me together." For the first time since I'd found that letter, I felt something other than despair. Anger was building in my chest, hot and righteous. They'd made one crucial mistake in their perfect plan. They'd underestimated both me and the grandson they'd left behind. As I reached for the phone to call the police, I wondered if Clark and Ophelia were enjoying their stolen freedom. Because if Levi's cameras had captured what I thought they had, their vacation was about to be cut very short. Detective Sarah Martinez was younger than I'd expected, probably in her 30s, with kind eyes and a no-nonsense attitude that reminded me of myself at that age. She sat at my kitchen table, Levi's tablet in front of her, watching the recordings with the same sick fascination I'd felt just hours earlier. "Mrs. Patterson, I have to ask, are you certain you want to pursue charges against your son?" Her voice was gentle but professional. "Family cases can be complicated, and once we start this process." "I'm certain," I said firmly, though my heart felt like it was breaking all over again. What they did was theft. The fact that Clark is my son doesn't change that. She nodded, making notes in her pad. "The power of attorney document. Do you remember what you were told when you signed it?" Clark said it was just for emergencies, in case I had a medical issue and couldn't make decisions for myself. I pulled the papers from my desk drawer, my hands steadier now that I had a purpose. "He said it would make things easier for everyone." Detective Martinez examined the document, her eyebrows raising slightly. "This is a very broad power of attorney. It gave him access to everything, bank accounts, property, investments. Did you read through it carefully before signing?" The shame burned hot in my cheeks. No, I trusted him completely. He's my son. Of course you did. Her tone held no judgment, just understanding. These types of financial elder abuse cases are more common than you'd think. Family members often use that trust to their advantage. Elder abuse. The term hit me like a slap. Was that what I was? An abused elder? The video evidence is excellent, she continued, scrolling through more of Levi's recordings. Clear audio, recognizable faces, incriminating statements. This isn't just theft, Mrs. Patterson. Based on what I'm hearing, there are also elements of fraud and conspiracy. Levi had been unusually quiet during the detective's visit, sitting in the corner with a coloring book, but now he looked up. Are you going to catch them? Detective Martinez smiled at him. We're certainly going to try, buddy. You did a great job collecting this evidence. I wanted to be a detective like on TV, Levi said proudly. I didn't know I was going to catch real bad guys. After the detective left with copies of all the evidence, I felt strangely empty. The wheels of justice were in motion. But part of me still couldn't believe it had come to this, that I was actively working to have my own son arrested. The call came 2 days later, just as I was trying to figure out how to stretch a can of beans into dinner for Levi and myself. Mrs. Patterson, this is Detective Martinez. We found them. My heart stopped. Where? Miami. They were staying at a luxury resort, paying cash. They're both in custody now, awaiting extradition back to Georgia. I sank into my chair, relief and devastation warring in my chest. What happens now? They'll be transported back here within the week. There will be arraignment hearings, and then we'll see if they want to fight the charges or make a deal. That night, I lay awake thinking about Clark as a little boy. How he used to crawl into my bed during thunderstorms, trembling against my side. How proud he'd been when he learned to ride a bike, demanding I watch him circle the driveway over and over. How he'd cried when his father left, begging me to make Daddy come home. When had that sweet, scared little boy turned into a man who could steal from his own mother without a second thought? The arraignment was held in a courthouse that smelled like floor wax and broken dreams. I sat in the back row, my neighbor Mrs. Chen beside me for moral support. Levi was at school, thank God. He didn't need to see this. When they brought Clark and Ophelia in, I barely recognized my son. He was thinner, his hair unkempt, wearing an orange jumpsuit that made his skin look sallow. But it was his eyes that shocked me most. Gone was any trace of the boy I'd raised. These were the eyes of a stranger. Ophelia, even in jail clothes, managed to look defiant. Her blonde hair was perfectly styled, her makeup flawless. She'd probably charmed some guard into bringing her cosmetics. The defendants are charged with theft by taking exploitation of an elderly person and conspiracy to commit fraud, the prosecutor announced, his voice echoing in the small courtroom. Clark's lawyer, a thin man with nervous energy, stood up. Your Honor, my client would like to make a statement. The judge nodded, and Clark rose on shaky legs. For a moment, just a moment, I thought he was going to apologize, that some remnant of my son would surface and this nightmare would finally make sense. Instead, he turned toward where I sat and said, Your Honor, I want the court to know that my mother was never a good parent. She was absent my entire childhood, always working, never there when I needed her. Everything I took, I earned through years of neglect and emotional abandonment. The words hit me like bullets. Around me, I heard Mrs. Chen gasp in shock. The prosecutor's pen stopped moving. Even Ophelia looked surprised at the venom in Clark's voice. She owes me for the childhood she stole, Clark continued, his voice getting stronger, more confident. For every birthday she missed, every school play she was too tired to attend, every night I went to bed wondering if my own mother loved me. That money wasn't theft. It was compensation. I felt something inside me break completely, not my heart, that had broken days ago. This was deeper, more fundamental. It was the death of every hope I'd ever held that my son might still exist somewhere inside this bitter stranger. The judge looked skeptical. Mr. Patterson, while childhood grievances may be relevant to sentencing, they don't negate the charges against you. How do you plead? Not guilty, Your Honor. Ophelia's plea was the same, delivered with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. As they were led away, she caught my gaze and mouthed something I couldn't quite make out, something that looked like, "Stupid old woman." Outside the courthouse, Mrs. Chen put her arm around my shoulders. "That boy has lost his mind," she said firmly. "Don't you believe a word of what he said in there?" But I couldn't stop thinking about Clark's accusations. Was he right? Had I been a terrible mother? I'd worked so hard to provide for him after his father left. Double shifts at the diner, weekend cleaning jobs, anything to keep us afloat and give him the life he deserved. Yes, I'd missed some things. But I'd been there for the important moments, hadn't I? His graduation, his wedding, the day Levi was born. I'd sacrificed everything for that boy, hadn't I? That evening, Levi found me sitting in my rocking chair, staring out the window at nothing. "Grandma, you look sad." Look. I pulled him onto my lap, this small boy who'd become my only family. "I am sad, honey. Sometimes grown-ups say things that hurt each other's feelings. Dad said mean things?" I nodded, not trusting my voice. Levi was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Grandma, do you remember when Mom broke your favorite vase last month?" "Yes." "And Dad said you were being dramatic when you got upset?" "I remember." "Well, I heard Mom tell him later that she broke it on purpose because she thought it was ugly." Levi looked up at me seriously. "She said you were too stupid to realize she did it on purpose." Another small cruelty I'd never known about. Another moment when I'd been made a fool without realizing it. "They did lots of mean things, Grandma. Not just the money. Mean things every day." Levi's voice was matter of fact, but his eyes were older than 8 years should allow. "That's not your fault." Out of the mouths of babes indeed. My grandson had seen what I'd been too blind to notice, that the cruelty hadn't started with their escape plan. It had been building for months, maybe years, hidden beneath smiles and family dinners and false affection. As Levi fell asleep in my arms, I made a decision. Whatever happened next, whatever Clark said or did, I wouldn't let his revised version of history rewrite the truth. I'd been an imperfect mother, yes, I'd made mistakes. But I'd loved him with everything I had, and that love hadn't deserved this betrayal. The boy I'd raised was gone, had been gone for longer than I wanted to admit, but the woman who'd raised him was still here, and she was stronger than anyone, including herself, had given her credit for. The revelation came from an unexpected source. Detective Martinez called me on a Thursday morning, her voice carrying an excitement that made me sit up straighter in my kitchen chair. "Mrs. Patterson, we've discovered something important about your daughter-in-law. Ophelia isn't her real name." I nearly dropped the phone. "What do you mean?" "Her real name is Patricia Winters, and she has a history. 3 previous marriages, all to older men with assets. 2 ended in messy divorces where she walked away with significant settlements. The 3rd husband died under suspicious circumstances, though nothing was ever proven." My blood ran cold. "You're saying she's done this before?" "Not exactly this, but she has a pattern of targeting vulnerable men, isolating them from their families, and then taking everything she can when the relationship ends. Your son appears to be her 4th victim." Victim? The word hung in the air between us. Could Clark really be a victim too? "There's more. We found her real social media accounts going back years. She's been documenting her projects. That's what she calls the men she targets, including your son." "What did she say about Clark?" Detective Martinez paused. "Mrs. Patterson, some of this is going to be hard to hear. I need to know. She calls him Project Mama's boy. Her posts describe a detailed plan to isolate him from you, make him resentful of your relationship, and convince him that he deserved more than what you were giving him." I felt sick. How long ago do these posts go back? 3 years. She targeted Clark specifically because of his close relationship with you and because she'd researched your financial situation. She knew about your savings, your property, everything. 3 years. Ophelia had been planning this almost from the moment she met Clark. "Detective, can I see these posts? I'll send you screenshots. But Mrs. Patterson, I want you to be prepared. She's very detailed about her methods." An hour later, I sat staring at my computer screen, reading words that made me question everything I thought I knew about the past 3 years. Project Mama's boy is progressing nicely. He's starting to see Mommy Dearest as the obstacle she's always been. A few more months of subtle programming, and he'll be ready to cut the cord permanently. Another post, dated 8 months ago. "The key with Mama's boys is patience. You can't rush the process. Every comment about how mommy doesn't understand him has to feel like his own realization. Every time I point out her interference, he has to think he came to that conclusion himself. And then, the one that made me physically ill. Clark actually cried today talking about how his mother never really loved him. 3 years of careful work paying off. By the time we're done, he'll thank me for helping him see the truth about what a selfish, manipulative woman she really is. The money will just be a bonus. I called Levi over to where I sat. He climbed onto my lap, reading over my shoulder with the kind of focus only children could maintain. Grandma, what's subtle programming? How do you explain psychological manipulation to an 8-year-old? It's when someone tricks your mind into believing things that aren't true, honey. Like when Mom used to tell Dad that you were trying to control him. I looked down at Levi in surprise. You heard that? Lots of times. She would say it when you weren't around, and then Dad would get mad about things you did that seemed normal to me. Levi frowned, working through the memory. Like when you asked him to help fix the garage door, Mom said you were treating him like a servant instead of a son. More pieces fell into place. I remembered that day clearly. Clark had snapped at me for asking, saying I was always demanding things from him. At the time, I'd been hurt and confused. I'd asked for help with a broken door. What was demanding about that? But Ophelia had poisoned the request before I'd even made it. Did you hear other things like that? Levi nodded sadly. Mom was really good at making Dad angry about stuff. She would talk about you when you were at the store or taking a shower, telling him all these things about what you really meant when you said stuff. Can you remember any examples? Like when you bought him that sweater for his birthday? Mom said you only did it because you thought his clothes were embarrassing and you wanted to change him. Dad believed her and got really upset. I remembered that sweater. Clark had barely thanked me for it, then never wore it. I'd assumed he just didn't like the color. Or when you asked if they were staying for dinner, Mom told Dad you were being passive-aggressive and trying to make them feel guilty about eating your food. Every interaction, every innocent question or gesture, had been filtered through Ophelia's twisted interpretation. No wonder Clark had grown distant and resentful. She'd been systematically rewriting our entire relationship in his mind. The phone rang, interrupting my thoughts. It was Detective Martinez again. Mrs. Patterson, Clark wants to see you. He's asking for a meeting at the jail. My heart lurched. Did he say why? His lawyer says he has something important to tell you. Something about the case. I looked down at Levi, who was still scrolling through Ophelia's social media posts with the morbid curiosity of a child who'd stumbled onto something adult and terrible. I'll be there this afternoon. The county jail was a gray, depressing building that smelled like disinfectant and despair. They led me to a small room with a metal table and 2 plastic chairs. Clark was already there when I arrived, looking smaller somehow in his orange jumpsuit. For a moment, we just stared at each other across the table. This was my son, the boy I'd rocked to sleep and bandaged scraped knees and cheered for at Little League games. But he was also the man who'd stolen my life savings and abandoned his own child. Mom, he said finally, his voice barely above a whisper. Clark, I've been thinking a lot about what happened, about everything. He ran his hands through his hair, a gesture I remembered from his childhood when he was nervous. My lawyer showed me some things about Ophelia. About her past. I waited, saying nothing. She had other husbands, other men she did this to. Clark's voice broke slightly. She planned all of this, from the very beginning. I know. He looked up sharply. You know? The police told me. They found her social media accounts. The ones where she called you Project Mama's Boy. Clark's face went white. She called me what? I pulled out my phone and showed him the screenshots Detective Martinez had sent. I watched as he read each post, his expression cycling through disbelief, horror, and finally, a grief so profound it was painful to witness. She said I was her 4th victim, he whispered, that I was the easiest one yet because I was so desperate for approval. Clark? She's right, isn't she? He looked up at me with tears in his eyes. I was desperate. I always felt like I wasn't good enough, like I was disappointing you somehow. When Ophelia came along and told me that you were the problem, that you were holding me back, it felt like someone finally understood. I reached across the table and took his hand. Son, she manipulated you. That's what she does. That's what she's good at. But I chose to believe her. I chose to take that money. I chose to leave you and Levi. Clark was crying now, years of suppressed emotion pouring out. Even if she planted the ideas, I'm the one who acted on them. Yes, I said simply. You did. He flinched at my honesty. But I wasn't done. But I also understand now how she did it. How she took every insecurity you had, every moment of doubt, and twisted them into weapons against our family. I squeezed his hand. That doesn't excuse what you did, Clark, but it helps me understand why you did it. I don't deserve your forgiveness. No, I agreed. You don't. Not yet. But you're my son, and despite everything, I still love you. The question is, what are you going to do now? Clark looked down at our joined hands. I want to make it right. I want to tell the truth about Ophelia, about how she planned all of this. I want to help get your money back. And what about Ophelia? She's still claiming you're both innocent. A bitter laugh escaped him. Ophelia doesn't know that I know the truth about her past. She still thinks I'm her devoted puppet. Clark looked up at me with something I hadn't seen in his eyes for years. Determination. But I'm done being manipulated. By her or anyone else. For the first time since this nightmare began, I felt a flicker of hope. Not for a happy ending. Too much had been broken for that. But for the possibility that my son might still exist somewhere inside the man who'd betrayed me. The Clark I'd raised would never have stolen from his mother. But maybe, just maybe, he was still strong enough to help bring down the woman who'd convinced him to become someone else entirely. The plan came together quickly once Clark agreed to cooperate. Detective Martinez explained it to me over coffee in a diner near the courthouse, her voice low and urgent. We want to wire Clark for a conversation with Ophelia. She still doesn't know that we've uncovered her past, or that Clark is aware of her manipulation. If we can get her to admit to the conspiracy on tape, it'll strengthen the case significantly. I stirred my coffee absently, thinking about the risks. What if she suspects something? That's possible, but based on her psychological profile, we think her arrogance will work in our favor. She believes she has complete control over Clark. She won't be expecting him to turn on her. The meeting was scheduled for the next day. I wasn't allowed to be present, but Detective Martinez promised to let me listen to the recording afterward. The waiting was torture. I spent the morning pacing my kitchen while Levi was at school, imagining every possible way the plan could go wrong. When the call finally came, Detective Martinez sounded pleased but grim. We got it all, Mrs. Patterson. Everything we needed. But I have to warn you, some of what Ophelia said about you and Clark is very difficult to hear. I need to know what she said. An hour later, I sat in the police station conference room, headphones on, listening to my son's voice as he confronted the woman who destroyed our family. The recording started with the sound of a door opening, then Clark's tentative voice. Ophelia, we need to talk. Baby, finally. I've been going crazy in here. Have you talked to your lawyer about getting us out on bail? There was a pause. Then Clark spoke again, his voice different somehow, stronger. I know about Patricia Winters. Silence. Long, uncomfortable silence. I don't know what you're talking about. Your real name, your previous marriages, Project Mama's Boy. When Ophelia spoke again, her voice had changed completely. Gone was the sweet, slightly helpless tone she'd always used around Clark. This voice was cold, calculating, almost bored. How much do you know? And everything. The social media posts, the planning, all of it. Ophelia laughed, a sound like ice cracking. Well, Mama's boy finally grew a backbone. How does it feel, Clark, knowing that every feeling you've had for the past 3 years was manufactured by me? How could you do this? How could you make me hate my own mother? Oh, please. I didn't make you do anything. I just helped you see what was already there. All that resentment, all that feeling like you weren't good enough. That was real, sweetie. I just gave it a target. I had to pause the recording. The casual cruelty in her voice was breathtaking. I want to understand, Clark's voice continued when I pressed play again. Help me understand why you did this. Why? Ophelia sounded amused. Because I could. Because you were so pathetically eager for someone to tell you that your problems weren't your fault. Do you know how easy you were, Clark? How desperate? We were married. We have a child together. We have nothing together. Levi was just part of the cover story. A way to get closer to your mother and her money. Did you really think I wanted to be tied down with some boring man-child and his brat forever? The contempt in her voice when she spoke about Levi made my hands clench into fists. You made me abandon my son. I made you? Oh, honey, I suggested you leave him behind because he'd slow us down. You agreed without even hesitating. That's on you, not me. You said we'd come back for him once we got settled. I said a lot of things. I told you your mother was manipulative and controlling. I told you she didn't really love you. I told you that you deserved better than taking care of an old woman for the rest of your life. Her voice turned mocking. And you believed every word because you wanted to believe it. That's not true, isn't it? Be honest, Clark. Didn't it feel good to finally have someone agree with you that your mother was the problem? Didn't it feel validating to have someone tell you that you were the victim in your own life story? There was a long pause, and when Clark spoke again, his voice was barely audible. Yes, of course it did. That's what made you so perfect for this. You were already primed to believe that everyone else was responsible for your failures. I just had to point you in the right direction. And the money? Was any of this real for you? The money was always the point, sweetheart. Though I have to admit, watching you turn against your own mother was more entertaining than I expected. The way you'd repeat my words back to her, thinking they were your own thoughts? Priceless. She loved me. My whole life, she loved me. Yes, she did, and you threw it away because I told you to. How does that feel, Clark? The raw pain in Clark's voice when he answered broke my heart. It feels like I killed something inside myself that I can never get back. Good. Maybe next time you'll think twice before trusting a woman you met at a bar after knowing her for 3 weeks. What about Levi? What about your son? For the first time, Ophelia's voice showed real emotion. Cold, hard anger. Levi was never my son. He was a mistake. A complication I had to work around. If you think I feel some maternal bond with that little brat, you're more delusional than I thought. He loves you. Children are stupid. They love anyone who feeds them and puts them to bed. Levi will get over it. I had to take the headphones off. The casual dismissal of my grandson's love, the complete absence of any maternal feeling, was more disturbing than anything else she'd said. Detective Martinez noticed my distress. There's more. But this is probably enough for you to hear right now. No, I need to hear all of it. The final part of the recording was Ophelia laying out the details of her plan with the pride of an artist describing her masterpiece. It took 2 years to completely turn Clark against you. The first year was just building trust, making him feel understood. The second year was more active programming, pointing out every little thing you did that could be interpreted as controlling or manipulative. Like what? Clark asked. Oh, everything. When you asked him to help with household repairs, I'd say you were treating him like hired help. When you cooked his favorite meals, I'd say you were trying to keep him dependent on you. When you asked about our plans or finances, I'd say you were being invasive and controlling. But those were just normal interactions between a mother and son. Exactly. That's what made it so easy. I took perfectly innocent behaviors and reframed them as evidence of your mother's selfishness. By the end, you were so primed to see her as the enemy that you'd get angry about things before I even had to say anything. And the power of attorney? That was the masterstroke. I spent months building up to that conversation, planting seeds about what would happen if your mother got sick or had an accident, making you feel responsible for protecting her assets. When you finally suggested getting the power of attorney, you thought it was your idea? It was my idea, because I made it your idea. Clark, sweetheart, you haven't had an original thought about your mother in 3 years. Every emotion, every decision, every moment of resentment. I planted all of it. The recording ended there, leaving me sitting in silence, trying to process what I'd just heard. Clark had been as much a victim as I was, but that didn't erase the choices he'd made. It didn't bring back the money or undo the abandonment, but it did help me understand how a woman I'd welcomed into my home had systematically destroyed my family from the inside out. Detective Martinez pulled up a chair beside me. Mrs. Patterson, with this recording and the evidence we've already gathered, Ophelia is looking at serious prison time. Clark's cooperation will help his own case significantly. What happens now? Now we present all of this to the prosecutor. Ophelia will likely be offered a plea deal, but given her history and the calculated nature of these crimes, she's looking at least 10 years in prison. 10 years. It seemed both too much and not nearly enough for the damage she'd caused. There's something else, Detective Martinez continued. Clark asked me to give you this. She handed me an envelope with my name written in Clark's familiar handwriting. Inside was a single sheet of paper. Mom, I know I can never undo what I did or make up for the pain I caused you and Levi. But I want you to know that hearing my own voice on that recording, hearing how easily I turned against you, has shown me exactly what kind of man I became. I'm not asking for forgiveness because I don't deserve it. I'm just asking for the chance to spend the rest of my life trying to become the son you deserved in the first place. I love you. I'm sorry. Clark, for the first time since this nightmare began, I cried tears that weren't just from pain or loss. They were tears of possibility, of hope that maybe, somehow, my family could find its way back to something resembling love. But first, Ophelia had to pay for what she'd done to all of us. 18 months later, I stood in the kitchen of my new apartment, making pancakes for Levi, while morning sunlight streamed through windows I could finally afford to keep uncovered. The smell of coffee filled the air, real coffee, not the generic brand I'd been stretching to last 3 weeks. Grandma, can I have chocolate chips in mine? Levi asked from his spot at the small dining table, homework spread out in front of him. Just a few, I said, smiling as I sprinkled the chips into the batter. We don't want Mrs. Chen thinking I'm spoiling you. Mrs. Chen had become an unofficial grandmother to Levi, taking him to the park on weekends and teaching him to play chess. It turned out that family could be found in the most unexpected places. The apartment was smaller than my old house, but it was ours, truly ours. When the court ordered the return of the stolen money, most of it anyway, I'd sold the house where I'd raised Clark. Too many painful memories lived in those walls. This place was a fresh start, decorated with pictures of Levi's artwork and the small treasures we'd collected together over the past year and a half. My phone buzzed on the counter. A text from Clark, sent from the minimum security facility where he was serving his sentence. Thinking of you and Levi today. I know it's the anniversary of when this all started. I'm sorry, Mom, for everything. I set the phone down without responding immediately. Clark and I had been exchanging messages for months now, careful conversations that slowly rebuilt the foundation of trust between us. It wasn't forgiveness, not yet. But it was communication, and that was more than I'd thought possible 18 months ago. The real victory had been Ophelia's trial. She'd refused the plea deal, convinced that her charm and manipulation skills would work on a jury. She'd been wrong. The evidence was overwhelming, the video recordings damning, and her complete lack of remorse had been obvious to everyone in that courtroom. 12 years in federal prison for elder fraud, conspiracy, and theft. The judge had been particularly harsh in his sentencing, calling her crimes a calculated destruction of family bonds for personal gain. I'd been there for the sentencing, sitting in the front row as Ophelia was led away in handcuffs. She'd looked back at me once, her face twisted with the kind of rage that comes from someone who'd finally been held accountable for their actions. This isn't over, she'd mouthed. But it was over. For me, at least. Grandma, Dad's visiting this weekend, right? Levi's voice brought me back to the present. Yes, sweetheart. Saturday afternoon. Clark had been granted supervised visitation with Levi 3 months ago, after completing anger management classes and family therapy. The visits were awkward at first. Too many months of abandonment couldn't be erased by good intentions. But Levi was resilient in the way only children could be. The first visit had broken my heart. Clark, in his prison uniform, sitting across from his son in a sterile visiting room, both of them trying to figure out how to talk to each other again. Levi had been polite but distant, answering Clark's questions with 1 or 2 words. But gradually, something had shifted. Clark stopped trying to be the fun dad and started being honest about his mistakes. He listened when Levi talked about school, about his friends, about the nightmares he'd had after his parents disappeared. "I'm sorry I left you, buddy," Clark had said during one of those visits, tears streaming down his face. "I made a terrible mistake and you paid the price for it. That's not fair, and I'm going to spend the rest of my life making it up to you. Levi had considered this with the seriousness of a child processing adult failures. Are you going to leave again? Never. Even if I can't live with you right now, I will never abandon you again. I promise. It was a promise Clark had kept, calling every week, sending letters, and using his limited visiting time to slowly rebuild the relationship with his son. The doorbell rang, interrupting my thoughts. I wiped my hands on a dish towel and went to answer it, expecting Mrs. Chen or maybe a package delivery. Instead, I found a young woman standing in the hallway, holding a manila envelope and looking nervous. Mrs. Patterson? My name is Jennifer Walsh. I'm an investigative journalist with the Atlanta Constitution. I'm working on a story about financial elder abuse, and I was hoping I could speak with you about your case. I studied her face, noting the earnest expression and the way she clutched her notebook like a lifeline. She was probably Levi's mother's age, maybe younger. I'm not interested in publicity, I said firmly. I understand, but Mrs. Patterson, your case helped law enforcement identify 3 other victims of your former daughter-in-law, women who were too ashamed or scared to come forward before. Your courage to prosecute gave them the strength to seek justice, too. That stopped me. Other victims? Ophelia had been operating for over a decade. Your case was the first time someone had enough evidence to make charges stick. The other women. They'd lost everything but thought no one would believe them. I thought about those other women, probably sitting in apartments like mine, trying to rebuild their lives after being betrayed by people they'd trusted. Had they felt the same crushing shame I'd experienced? The same sense that somehow they should have seen it coming? What exactly do you want from me? Just your story. How it happened. How you fought back. How you survived. There are thousands of elderly people being victimized by family members every year. Most never report it because they're too ashamed, or because they don't want to see their loved ones prosecuted. And you think my story will help them? I think your story shows that fighting back is possible. That choosing yourself over protecting the people who hurt you isn't selfish. It's necessary. I looked back toward the kitchen, where Levi was probably wondering where his pancakes were. This child who'd saved us both with his hidden cameras and his innocent understanding that what his parents had done was wrong. If I agree to this, I have conditions. Jennifer nodded eagerly. Of course. My grandson's privacy is protected. No real names, no identifying information about him. He's been through enough. Absolutely. And I want part of the story to be about family members who enable this kind of abuse. My son was a victim too, but he was also a perpetrator. People need to understand that those 2 things can exist at the same time. That's exactly the kind of nuance this story needs. I invited her in, and for the next 2 hours I told my story. All of it. The betrayal, the discovery, the painful process of choosing justice over misplaced loyalty. Jennifer listened without judgment, asking thoughtful questions and taking careful notes. Mrs. Patterson, she said as she was packing up to leave, do you regret pressing charges against your son? It was a question I'd asked myself countless times over the past 18 months. No, I said finally. I regret that it was necessary. I regret that he made choices that forced me to choose between enabling him and protecting myself. But I don't regret holding him accountable. It was the most loving thing I could do for both of us. That evening, after Levi was asleep, I sat on my small balcony overlooking the parking lot of my apartment complex. It wasn't much of a view, but it was peaceful. Below me, families were coming home from work, children playing in the courtyard. Life continuing in all its messy, complicated glory. My phone buzzed with another text from Clark. I read the book you sent about families healing after trauma. Thank you for not giving up on us. This time, I texted back, I'll never give up on you, son, but I'll also never again put your needs above my own well-being. That's what love looks like now. His response came quickly. I understand. That's what I want it to look like too. The story Jennifer wrote was published 3 weeks later. It was fair and honest, highlighting both the manipulation I'd endured and the strength it had taken to fight back. The response was overwhelming. Dozens of emails from other elderly victims, from adult children who recognized their own family dynamics in the story, from people who simply wanted to say that my courage had inspired them to examine their own relationships. But the message that meant the most came from an unexpected source, a letter, forwarded through the newspaper, with no return address. Mrs. Patterson, I am one of the 3 other women who came forward after your case went public. Like you, I was financially abused by a family member I trusted completely. Like you, I thought I was the only one this had happened to. Reading your story gave me the courage to finally file charges against my own son and his wife. They were convicted last month. I wanted you to know that your refusal to stay silent saved more than just yourself. Thank you for showing me that protecting our families sometimes means protecting ourselves from our families. With gratitude, a fellow survivor. I folded the letter carefully and put it in my jewelry box, next to the locket my mother had left me and a photo of Levi on his first day of school in our new neighborhood. That night, I called Clark during his allotted phone time. "Mom, is everything okay?" "Everything's fine," I said, settling into my rocking chair with a cup of tea. "I just wanted to hear your voice." We talked for 20 minutes about ordinary things, the book he was reading, Levi's upcoming science fair project, the job training program Clark was enrolled in for when he was released. As we were saying goodbye, Clark said quietly, "Mom, I'm proud of you, for fighting back, for protecting Levi, for not letting Ophelia get away with what she did to our family. I know it cost you a lot to prosecute me, but it was the right thing to do. I love you, son. I love you too, Mom. And I'm going to spend the rest of my life proving that I'm worthy of that love." After I hung up, I sat in the quiet apartment, listening to the soft sounds of Levi's breathing from his bedroom. This wasn't the life I'd planned at 66. I'd thought I'd be the grandmother baking cookies and spoiling her grandchild, not the single guardian picking up the pieces after my own son's betrayal. But it was a good life, an honest life. A life where respect and love went hand in hand, where trust was earned rather than assumed, and where choosing myself hadn't made me selfish. It had made me strong. In the end, that was Ophelia's greatest failure. She'd tried to destroy our family by turning us against each other. Instead, she'd taught us the difference between love and enabling, between loyalty and self-destruction. And in learning that difference, we'd found our way back to each other, not as we'd been before, but as something better, something real. Now I'm curious about you who listened to my story. What would you do if you were in my place? Have you ever been through something similar? Comment below. And meanwhile, I'm leaving on the final screen 2 other stories that are channel favorites, and they will definitely surprise you. Thank you for watching until here.